Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. This is a discussion of uh, the attention economy, which we talked about a little bit last time, and also surveillance capitalism. You should have watched a video by about the ideas of the professor at Harvard, Shona Zuboff, and we'll be discussing that in addition to some more in-depth ideas from the Ezra Klein pieces that we read last time. Before we do that, though, I want to get into a little bit of practice on our logical fallacies. So you remember the term begging the question. And when you ask what question is being begged, it's very similar to asking what is the underlying assumption in this sentence. So I want to practice that for a minute. So get your pen and paper out and write down what you think the underlying assumption is in this sentence. The sentence is, CSULB tuition has to go up because the cost of running the university is increasing. So obviously there's potentially two sets of assumptions here. One about the cost increasing. So let's assume that that part is correct. That in fact the cost is increasing, and it is in fact increasing. Just as a facet of inflation, if nothing else, costs are definitely rising. So leave that part off. Focus instead on the first half of the sentence. CSULB tuition has to go up. So think about that for a minute and write down what the underlying assumption is here. Probe it for a bit. You might think it's obvious, but I've found that most students actually don't get the right answer on this. So kind of think it through, probe it, push yourself. What's the underlying assumption in the first half of the sentence that CSULB tuition has to go up? Write down your ideas. Okay, what I've got is the underlying assumption here is that students ought to be the one to bear the rising costs of running our university. Therefore, tuition needs to go up. You remember in the sentence, it said that the costs of the university are increasing, and the first half of that was tuition needs to go up because those costs are increasing. But the assumption is there that the costs of the university increasing should be borne by the students through tuition. That's an assumption that needs to be proven before you can go forward with the idea that tuition ought to increase because the costs of the university are increasing. There are lots of places around the world where the student, in fact, does not bear the cost of the education. That's true not just at the university level, but in our country, that's true from all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade, right? Because the cost of education is rising doesn't mean that students start getting charged. Rather, it means that other means of paying for that education are devised. So the assumption that university tuitions ought to be borne by students doesn't bear out all around the world, and it doesn't bear out in other similar cases. So it really needs to be questioned and thought through carefully. Why? Why is it that the rising costs of university ought to be borne by students? You could say, well, it's because it's students that benefit from that education. But in fact, higher education is just like secondary education and primary education. The benefits of that education are borne by the society as a whole. Everyone benefits when we have a well-educated populace, not just the people who are receiving the education, but society as a whole. There are many ways in which that's true, not just for employers, but also in terms of citizenry, in terms of productivity, in terms of people obeying the law. All of those things are related to being better educated. So the benefits of education are widespread. So why should the costs of education be borne primarily on the backs of students? Of course, at the CSULB, it's not primarily on the backs of students. There's lots of other funding, including taxpayer funding, that goes into that. But the recent increases in tuition are something that ought to be thought about and questioned. Why is it that students should be bearing those costs? So underlying assumptions, begging the question, directly related to you as a student who pays tuition at the university. Okay, so in our last few discussions, we talked about the ideas that Ezra Klein put forward to us, including the term the attention economy, and the idea that our attention is this really important resource that everyone in the world is attempting to take from us, that our attention becomes therefore a form of currency that we pay for things with our attention, and that attention that we pay is then purchased and bought by people who wish to influence us, companies that wish to influence us. So some really interesting ideas about that here. Same idea put into a quote: a shift in the global economy from a material-based economy to one based on the capacity of human attention. In this economy, attention is not only a resource, but a currency. Users pay for a service with their attention. So you always have to ask yourself when you're getting something for free, why am I getting this for free? And in the attention economy, it's usually because you are actually paying for that through your attention. And that attention is very, very valuable. Anything you look at, even if for a second, anything you actually stop and read, anything you engage with in any way, that is valuable to someone. So you are not getting things for free. You are being spoken to, you are being manipulated, you are being shaped, you are being directed, you are being guided through the ways in which your attention is being played with. So the attention economy is a term that was first coined in the 1960s by a Nobel laureate, Professor Herbert Simon from Carnegie Mellon University, whose photo is here. And it very carefully describes the social media environment, other environments as well, but particularly the social media environment in which many of us live our lives. So what aspects of human psychology are exploited in the attention economy, particularly within the environments of social media and related ways in which when we are on a digital device, our attention is constantly grabbed, whether that's just in social media or in some other way. You look at a screen and there's all these notifications that pop up at you. There are all of these colors pulling you to this app or that app. There's all of these ways in which your device is attuned and tuned to be able to grab you and pull you in certain directions. So what are, especially in social media, the key ways in which our attention is grabbed and held? Related to negativity bias, a term we have been focusing on all semester, there is what's called safety prioritization. So the use of shock and fear to grab our attention and to hold us somewhere is one of the biggest devices, particularly in social media and in the news economy as well, but in social media in particular. This is why there is in fact so much misinformation and disinformation that relates to things that could potentially make people afraid. This is in particular the emphasis on undocumented migration into the United States, and playing that up in ways that activates people's fear or activates their shock. There have been lots of studies which show that in the social media environment, as people are sharing with each other, that lies and disinformation, so intentional forms of misinforming people, actually spread 6 times faster on the internet. So if someone reads something, sees something, watches something that is not accurate, that is in fact a lie, then they will participate in spreading that faster than if something is true. This has been actually shown the research has been replicated, so this has been shown to bear out across different studies that it spreads about 6 times faster. Lies spread 6 times faster than the truth on social media. And there's got to be complex reasons psychologically for why that is, but I have not yet encountered a really well-documented explanation for the fact that lies spread faster. But that is part of the attention economy. If it's a lie, it will get your attention faster and it will spread faster. So it's another facet of what we are dealing with in the attention economy. There's also something that gets activated in us in the attention economy, which is our need for social validation. As humans, as we've talked about all semester, we're highly oriented towards the group. We're highly oriented towards interpersonal communication and towards connecting with other humans. It's a major facet of who we are as a species. And when we are in the digital world, that is no less true than it is in the real world, where we are out looking for social connection, we're out looking for social validation, being told that we are welcome, that we are valued, that we are important, and that we're part of a group. So social validation, anything within the attention economy that offers us the possibility of social validation, or that allows us to gauge the social validation of others, is particularly fascinating to us and pulls our attention in. Finally, there is a tendency, as we've talked about this semester, in humans as a species to be tribalistic, for us to prioritize our social group over other social groups. And sometimes that can then be amped up in ways that make us, in fact, very confrontational to other social groups. So within a social media environment and an attention economy, we pay more attention to things that activate our sense of us, them, that activate our sense of there being a side to things and us identifying with one side against another side. Our human psychology, in fact, gravitates towards that, is interested in that, and therefore it is something that is used to hook us and pull us in the attention economy. So as we read in the Ezra Klein pieces, the political media that exists within this attention economy is in fact biased, but not so much toward the left or the right, instead towards the loud, the outrageous, the colorful, the inspirational, the confrontational. Doesn't matter which side it is, both sides are going to get more outrageous, more confrontational, more colorful in order to gain more attention in a social media environment in which attention is the currency. So it's biased toward political stories and figures who activate our identities, because it is biased toward and dependent on the fraction of the country with the most intense political identities. So why is that? Remember again, in the new media environments that the internet and social media have created, everyone just scatters to what they're interested in. We are now no longer in a shared space with each other of media consumption. We're not all watching the same TV channels. We're not all reading the same newspapers or the same magazines as we once were as a nation and as a society as a whole, as the earth as a whole. We were reading much more society by society. We were reading and consuming and watching very similar things to each other, so that we were all in the same frame in terms of what information flow we tended to get. Now in the attention economy, we have just scattered to the winds, and whatever you're interested in is what you will pursue. And therefore, the news media is left not to speak to everyone, but to speak only to those who feel tied to the news media and feel tied to a political identity. And therefore, it starts to get more and more us, them, because it gets more and more identitarian, and the news then starts to be created for sides rather than created for everyone. So the new kind of news media environment creates a new kind of news media. We get new coverage that we didn't used to have in the same way because of this divisive scattering to the winds that then prioritizes news only for those who care and who have an interest in it because of their identities are tied to it. So how has the new social media and therefore politics itself become more identitarian? Same idea, just making sure that you're really understanding this connection, this through line here of the changing news media environment as we come into the internet and then came into social media, how that then is creating not only new forms of telling the news or a new flavor of the news, but also that new flavor of the news has changed politics itself. So our politics are shifting and we become more and more polarized as our news media that reflects on and reports what's happening in the nation become more identitarian because of this changing news media environment that is social media and the internet. So quote, an identity, once adopted, is harder to change than an opinion. An identity that binds you to a community you care about is costly and painful to abandon, and the mind will go to great lengths to avoid abandoning it. So the more media people see that encourages them to think of themselves as part of the group, the more they publicly proclaim through sharing and liking and following and subscribing that they are part of a group. And the deeper the identity takes root and the more resistant the underlying views become to change. So this is, again, another really interesting facet of how the new media environment that we live in has changed what it means to be political. It used to be that you would, as I said, read newspapers or watch the news on television. You could write letters to the editor, or you could talk to your neighbors about what you saw, but it wasn't quite the same as now, where people are constantly creating an online identity for themselves that speaks to who they are politically all the time. So that, or apolitically, if they're entirely detached from politics. And so as people start to post, like, share anything about their political views, it actually makes them feel like they own those views more tightly than previously, where they weren't constantly posting, sharing, and sort of fronting about who they are, what their identity is, what matters to them all the time in this public arena. So the new constant online public persona that we create actually makes us hold on to and sort of batten down the hatches on what we believe in ways that were less tight, less rigid, more fluid in the past. Absolutely fascinating idea. Okay, so I want to go through a series of questions so you can see where I want to take you. And this is reiterating some of the things we've already talked about. So just deepening our discussion on that to make sure that you've got a handle on what I want you to understand for the exam. So we know that it's really important for everyone in a society to have an accurate flow of information about the events that are taking place, what the government is doing, what people are doing in response to the government, the disasters that are taking place. All of this is key to not only being a good citizen, but particularly, or a good member of society, but particularly being able to hold your governmental officials from the city level to the state level to the federal level to the Oval Office, hold them accountable all the way up. We have to have a good information flow. Otherwise, we don't know what's going on, and we don't know what we think about it or whether we care. So social media then entering into that relationship between information flow and democracy is quite dangerous because it makes it more difficult for us to get a good information flow that is not lies and fake news. It also makes it more difficult for people to become knowledgeable because it takes our attention and scatters it to the wind, so to speak, rather than making it such that we're all getting the same flow of information. So it just makes it difficult for people to care because they're off doing things that are more appealing, exciting, or pleasurable to them than finding out what's going on in the world. So the new world that we live in with social media makes the flow of information that is vital to the operation of democracy a much more difficult prospect. So recognizing that as a critical thinker and as a person who is wanting to be a responsible member of society, you need to ask yourself how you know whether you can trust something that you encounter on the internet or in social media. That's just a key facet of life today as a critical thinker, right? It's not just knowing these terms, it's also knowing how to figure out whether or not you can trust something that you encounter in this digital environment, particularly with AI now taking over as well. One of the key things you can do is what's called lateral reading. It's where if you're looking at something on a page, you go outside that platform onto a browser, potentially to Wikipedia or somewhere else, and you look up what it is you're encountering, the person you're encountering, the website, the group. Look them up and see what other people have said about them, other people's opinions about them. Know what kind of politics they have, know what motivates them, know whether they're nonprofit or for-profit, know whether they are aligned with any political party or any particular politicians or not. Find all of this out before you decide whether or not you're going to trust a source. That's called lateral reading. So if this is what you are encountering, you shift over to another place and you look it up and you see what are other people saying about this thing that you're reading over here. That way, take in multiple viewpoints and particularly be concerned with expert consensus. So who are experts in this topic and what do they say and what kind of agreement do they come to when they discuss these things? But overall, we need to know that we actually can have some shared news sources with the people around us. And so I would recommend that you go to key news sources, whether or not they are always fully reliable or always something that you want to trust. Instead, that you participate in the shared national conversations that make up our dialogue around what needs to happen in our country politically. So what are some of those good shared news sources? And again, this is with an asterisk to note that not all of these sources, as we've already been talking about this semester, are always reliable. They often have been noted to lead us astray, but they're also the places where we get the highest quality of information by and large, noting that that doesn't always happen. So a reminder of some of the outside objective nonprofit groups that assess the news media and monitor them for not just bias, but also for accuracy, which is far more important than political bias. It's a question of, are the facts that they are disseminating accurate or are they not? That didn't used to be such a question, but today in the social media environment where so much of what we read are actually lies, we do need to go and assess whether or not accuracy is what's being the goal of the journalists and the news outlets that we are consuming. So highly recommend for just news headlines and breaking news, AP and Reuters, those are both considered to be some of the most neutral and also the most factual of outside news sources. But anything that's up in that top in that gray bubble is good for breaking news. It's not always the best for analyzing news, which is, to my mind, oftentimes more important than breaking news, is being able to analyze it and know what it means, what's important about it. So I would say that central bubble with that's more in the greenish color, greenish yellow. In fact, a lot of that, some things moving down into analysis, can be just as important, more important in some ways than knowing the breaking news, particularly for you as students who are trying to find out what things mean and are not necessarily as knowledgeable about what things mean yet, reading strong news analysis can be a really great way to learn about the world rather than just the facts of what's taking place. As I've mentioned before, there is truly a balancing act that you have to consider here. In the attention economy, our attention is being pulled constantly everywhere, right? Look at this text. Look at this this DM. Look at this video. Look at this. Like constantly attempting to pull us this way and that way, and it's not good for our mental health, particularly because of the ways in which all of these try and activate our negativity bias with making us feel fearful and anxious, or our sense of social validation, our sense of identity, right? So it's living in these digital spaces is truly not great for our mental health. At the same time, if that's where we're going to be getting our news, there's other options, of course. You can get an actual paper, an actual magazine, but if that's where you're going to be getting your news, then you need to balance your need for good information with your need to protect your mental health and just protect your attention, right? Like keep your attention so that you have it when you need it and don't allow it to be frittered away every which way just because something wants your attention. You go to it. So how do we do that and still get good news information? And I would recommend that one of the best ways is actually not to read the headlines, but instead to get news digests by way of podcasts. So I've mentioned some of these in the past. Here's a little bit of a longer list of 4 podcasts that you can listen to on the bus or while you're driving or while you're brushing your teeth in ways that can sort of allow you to double up, makes it fairly convenient. The New York Times has one called The Daily, which only takes one story a day, which is again great because you're not frittering your attention to a variety of stories, but it's helping you focus and go deep on just one story a day. So then over the course of a week, you're having just 5 stories a day. And you're getting more grounded in 5 stories over the course of a week if you just listen to that podcast and nothing else. I think it's a way of staying informed, not getting scattered all over the place in terms of attention, and getting a more in-depth analysis than you would if you just read headlines. I think that's a good one. There's also National Public Radio up first. It will give you 3 headlines, no more than that, just 3 headlines, and cover them in about 15 minutes. So you are getting a little bit of depth, and you're also still getting a breadth of, a slightly bigger breadth of stories on a daily basis. Something similar from the Wall Street Journal. It's called What's News. It happens twice a day, and it gives you 1 story in 15 minutes. So it's shorter than the New York Times and 2 stories a day, but it's something sort of similar. And then last, I would suggest Vox's Today Explained. It is a daily news dive in about 25 minutes. So it takes the top stories of the day and explores them in a conversational way that gives you more depth. So it's not, again, just not the headlines or just the breaking news, but gives a little bit of analysis, a little bit of grounding in them. And it's not that long, it's 25 minutes. So those are some suggestions that you can turn to kind of weed out the visual demands of trying to get news information in, say, like an Instagram feed or a Twitter feed, something like that. Set that aside, try a podcast, and try maybe just one of them a day so that you're starting to get more in-depth information that is also from a well-regarded news source. You're not getting lies in social media, and you are grounding yourself still in what's happening at any given day. So we have 2 new terms. We have the attention economy, which focuses on the ways in which our attention is both something that is highly valuable to businesses, and it's also the currency with which we pay businesses for the things that they give us. So free items very often we pay them with our attention, which they then sell to people who want our attention to be able to influence us. So then the next term, related very much to the attention economy, but bigger than the attention economy, is surveillance capitalism. So the attention economy operates within this larger system called surveillance capitalism. And it's a term that was coined by the professor Shoshana Zuboff, who teaches business at Harvard. This is a highly regarded professor whose term surveillance capitalism has been covered and focused on in innumerable ways. This is like a key term for understanding the way in which we live our lives today. And Professor Zuboff, as you saw in the video, which you should have watched before this discussion, explains to us that surveillance capitalism is a new system under which everything we do, everything we say, everything we type, every direction that we look, our very faces, our very bodies, where we move to, where we don't move to, what we buy, what we don't buy, how long it takes us to buy, how we feel about something, how we feel about everything, when we feel things, all of this becomes information that is watched, gathered, so the surveillance, and then gathered and bundled up together in ways that allow those who own that data to predict not only our own behavior and what will motivate us, what will demotivate us, how to get us to do the things that whoever's buying the data want us to do, not only individually, but also collectively. So all of this data goes into these large social models that enable whoever owns them and has access to them to be able to predict how people will operate and to predict how to push people to operate in the ways that the people who own the data want them to. So these are the tiniest scraps of information, whether you put a period or an exclamation point or no kind of punctuation at all. Little tiny things like that. How long it took you to get somewhere, where you went, what sorts of colors you put together. All of these tiny bits of information then become like the new oil. So in the old economy, which was all about steam engines and building things and steel and moving across the physical environment and building things up in the physical environment and factories, all of that was largely driven by coal and oil, as we're going to be talking about a lot in what comes. Fossil fuels were the thing that drove that economy. Today, in our digital environments, in our digital life, the thing that drives this economy is in fact data about us. The tiniest things that we would never think that anyone would care to know about us actually are highly significant when they are all put together in such a way that it allows the companies that own those tiny bits of data to predict who we are and what we will do and what will motivate us. So this is more than just the attention economy. Our attention is being sold for sure, our eyeballs and us paying attention. It's bigger than that. It's everything about us, not just our attention within the surveillance economy. So how does this operate? They are watching us. They are picking up the things that we type. They're picking up our photos. They are picking up our feed from our cameras in various places, microphones in various places, all of the time, which is why it's called surveillance capitalism. It extracts all of this information, our faces, our voices, our preferences, our habits, our movements, and compiles them into models that then get sold to third parties. Not the data itself gets sold, but rather the predictions get sold. So the companies that own this data would never sell it to anyone else because owning it is what makes them powerful. Instead, they'll sell predictions to those that want them. So a clothing company, as we saw in the video, that then gets sold a prediction, you should send an ad at this time to this person, and they're likely to buy the thing that you give them. But the data itself remains with the companies that amassed it in the first place. So who are these companies that are amassing all of this information about us? Everyone's trying to do this right now, everyone who can, but the big names, who are also the biggest companies in the world, really, are Meta, which used to be called Facebook, and owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and other, also some gaming platforms. Google, which obviously owns, as you know, Google, like the browser, Chrome and things like that, like to Google something. But also owns YouTube. You may not know this. Google Maps, your Gmail. It's actually extracting information from Gmail and using that to understand you and to predict how to influence you going forward. So Google has actually many places that it takes data, but these are some of them. Amazon also has tons and tons of data about you, not just from what you buy, but also from what you watch online. Microsoft, just like Gmail, is sending the things that you write and type to Google. The university issued email to you is in fact through Microsoft. Microsoft also owns, you probably know, Xbox and Activision Blizzard. So all of the things you do and say while you're gaming on those within those companies then goes back to Microsoft, who also owns pretty much everything like PowerPoint that I'm working on right here. All of that goes to Microsoft to, again, be able to predict a great deal about you. Apple, everything you do on your Apple phone or through iTunes or Arcade, all of that goes to Apple. And of course, TikTok, now being a major social media site, is said to have one of the best algorithms for understanding its users of any of these companies. So TikTok is situated to become one of the best data brokers of any company. So you think that what TikTok is doing is just selling like advertising space or something. No, actually what TikTok is doing is selling its knowledge of you, who you are, what you care about, what motivates you, what doesn't. Same with Instagram, same with Facebook. This is what those supposedly free platforms are actually using as the way that they fund themselves, and so much so that they are incredibly wealthy, massive companies, because this is so profitable to be able to gather little tiny bits of information about you, package them up, and predict how to influence you. So this is social media, all forms of social media. This is all of your phone apps, particularly if it's a free phone app, you're downloading an app onto your phone and you're like, I don't want to pay $7 for that app. I'll take the free one over here. The free one over here is actually probably collecting more data about you than the one that you're paying for, because that's how it funds itself, is through data collection about you. So be very careful when you download an app onto your phone and check and see what kinds of privacy conditions it has when you do that. Most browsers, not all browsers. So all of the standard ones are going to be collecting all the data about you, but browsers like Brave and like Firefox do not. So if you don't want to have Google or Microsoft or Apple knowing that much about you, and you'd rather not be part of their massive mill of selling you to people and selling predictions about you to people, then you need to use a browser that is not based on one of those companies. So you want to use Brave or Firefox. Putting those devices into your home, Alexa, OK Google, those things, anything similar to that, Ring, Nest, any of those doorbells, what these do is actually record sound in your home all day long. What you say, what you listen to, who you're fighting with, when you're fighting, what you're fighting about. This is all data through these microphones that are placed in your home. So consider carefully whether or not you think that actually it's worthwhile to have that in your home. Similarly with thermostats that are digital, or refrigerators that you can interact with. The old school ones aren't collecting your data. They're not breaching privacy issues, but the new ones all are. Similarly, new cars. So everything with the screen might be really fun. At the same time, what is happening in that car is it's just collecting constant information, such that it can then do things like sell information about you to your insurance company, and your insurance company can jack up your insurance based on the fact that you are driving faster, or you are stopping harder, or you are spending a little bit less time to get to a destination than most people would. All of that then becomes data that your car collects about you and sells to insurance companies, etc. All the other people who might want anything about you moving around. And then also collects all of this video of what's around you and sells that to anyone who wants to just see what's around. So all of these forms of data collection are happening through what's called the Internet of Things, the things that we buy and that we put in our homes or that we drive around in become forms of like spies. They surveil us and send that data to whoever owns those the things that were sold to us. So oftentimes people think that the only information, as was said in the video, the only information that these companies have about us are the things that we've agreed to, that we sign the privacy statements, we go ahead and we like click through and we're like, all right, whatever. I mean, I don't have time to read this. Fine, I'll do this. And you move on. And you think, okay, well, I'm a little responsible because I didn't actually read everything. But in fact, the majority of what they're collecting about you is not even written in those agreements in the first place. It's this no man's land of all this information that there aren't any rules. There are no laws about whether you can collect it or not. Someone's walking down the street. Can you collect their face and sell it to a face recognition service? Someone's speaking in someone else's home. Can you collect their voice and sell it to voice recognition services? So these are not, in fact, legislated at present. And as the film said, this is something that we need to start thinking about collectively in ways that start protecting us and creating the world that we actually want to live in. Because right now, all the things that we do, say, the ways that we look, what we wear, what we care about, all of it is just being pulled out, extracted, and used in these massive models, partially to generate AI, but in all these other ways as well that we have never agreed to. We did not say that this is what we agreed to. We never signed a yes to that. So this needs to change, and it needs to change collectively. None of us can change this individually. We all have to together make it illegal to do, and we need to be able to bring that to bear on these really powerful data companies, which have in some ways gotten so big that they are difficult to think about taking on at this point, but that's where we are as a society. We need to take them on. Europe has started to. The European Union is the one place that has started to put the beginnings of guardrails on our data and on privacy, but even though they're ahead of other places, it's still not what it should be. Other countries, the United States, and particularly countries like China, are the opposite. So in China, you basically have no right to privacy. Even if you would fly through China, which I did, just to go into the airport in order to catch another flight out, I had to have my entire face and my irises scanned and all of my fingerprints, which no one told me when I booked my flights. I didn't know that China would take my biometric data, but I had no choice when I got off the plane. I would either have to just stay in, like, get back on the plane and not catch my next flight, or I had to agree to give up all my biometric data. So some countries are far less careful and far more. The government themselves are collecting tons of this data than others, but we need to bring pressure to bear on our governments to start to protect us from this form of data extraction. So just to reiterate why it is this matters, you're going to hear most people say, like, I don't care that they know what kind of ice cream I like. I don't care that they see that I'm up at 3 a.m. all the time. Like, why does it matter to me? This is like not a big deal. But in fact, what it does is create the possibility for shaping society itself. This is not just about you getting ads, getting better ads or worse ads. This is about the future of society itself. This is already true in political campaigns that have taken place in the Caribbean, in the UK with Brexit, in the 2016 election, and elections all around the world now are being highly influenced by these massive data models that enable the possibility of both predicting whether people will vote, what they care about in ways that then inflames their preferences and either gets them out or demotivates them to make them stay home. So it becomes a means of actually controlling elections. It also becomes a means of controlling, therefore, everything related to that. So Cambridge Analytica is now a disbanded company who pioneered this, the use of data from Facebook primarily, to be able to control elections. And they were highly influential in Brexit in the United Kingdom in 2016. And they were highly influential in the 2016 election here in the United States by being able to demotivate some and motivate others within very tiny little parts of the country where there were slim enough majorities one way or the other that it mattered if you targeted voters with a ton of advertising about the election. So they were able to pinpoint where and how to push the election in particular directions that had then national outcomes. So this is all of this data is not just about you individually, it's about society collectively as well. So it then also has important ramifications for things like whether or not the government can see who you are and know who you are just through facial recognition or through voice recognition. The Chinese government, of course, using that extensively, also being used extensively in the Middle East. So facial recognition, voice recognition are all, again, not just about you and advertising to you, but they're about the safety of society as a whole and the possibility for creating a police state or not. So how much control can a government have over its people? All of this then comes together through the control of data. So this is actually quite important to the shaping of society itself and to your ultimate safety as an individual. So what I find so interesting about this shift to the era of having everybody having a phone in their pocket, we've talked about it, the new attention economy, we talked about surveillance capitalism that your phone and the other devices around you are part of. I think we feel like a phone will give us more security. You give a phone to a kid because you want them to be able to call, because you want them to be secure. But in fact, there's this paradox where what we think will make us secure ends up making us insecure, both through surveillance capitalism, data collection, the attention economy, the harm it can do to our mental health, right? There's also this weirdness where we have phones that should make us that much more informed because it gives us access to a world of information that was actually much more difficult to come by before. But the truth has been that we've seen with more phones in our pockets, we've seen people become more misinformed and know less about the world and believe more lies. And we've seen the rise of conspiracy theories in ways that actually have been harmful. So rather than having more information with those phones in our pockets, people have worse information. We also see this strange paradox of disconnection where we think that phones allow us to be constantly connected. We can call, we can text, we always have people with us. We can be DMing people any time of the day, which is true. At the same time, though, as to the extent that they have made us connect less in person, they've actually given us less rich, fulfilling kinds of personal interactions. So they have actually disconnected us from each other in ways that maybe don't feel obvious, because we feel like we have people with us all the time in the form of our phone, but in fact those are less fulfilling, less satisfying, less full human interaction. So we're more disconnected rather than more connected. So all of this is this complex set of like new possibilities, and then also the atrophy of old things that were quite good in our lives. This paradox of all of this all together at the same time. So, food for thought. That's my spiel on surveillance capitalism and on the attention economy and on the paradoxes that phones bring to our lives. And it's time now to go and take your quiz.